In a ruined city, a man smoked his last cigarette and said there was no way they could win against their enemies. He leaned against the wall of a broken house, watching as monsters marched toward them. These monsters came from the military empire of Dragania. They were the strongest of their time, the Dragons. Dragania's dragon rider army was unstoppable. Other countries fell quickly to their power. After every battle, the dragon riders returned home as heroes, admired by the people. Crowds cheered for them, calling them cool and powerful. Meanwhile, in a different place, a man cleaned a facility. A fly tried to get close to him but died before even touching him. He stood in what seemed to be a stable for dragons, holding a broom. Unlike the famous dragon riders, he had no admirers. He felt jealous of them, frustrated that all the attention went to them instead of him. Soon after, the man was called to the main office. For some reason, Breed Stallion was fired from his job. He felt confused. A bald, heavyset man grew irritated while eating a chicken leg. He reminded Breed that the country had been talking about reducing its military forces and weapons. He explained that the great empire of Dragania had already taken control of the surrounding countries with their rapid advances. The only ones left were small nations that weren't worth attacking. According to him, the higher-ups had decided there was no need for more troops. It was time to get rid of unnecessary workers. Breed had seen this coming. He had already noticed the number of dragon trainers decreasing for a while. Being a dragon trainer was tough work. It was dirty and dangerous. The worst part was the smell. It clung to you no matter how much you washed. Anyone hoping to be popular with girls had no chance. Those who had quit always left with a look of relief on their faces. Breed asked the fat bald man if he could quit. The man called him admirable but reminded him that the soldiers were already enough to clean and feed the dragons. Breed argued that caring for dragons wasn't that simple. He explained that each dragon had its own personality. Some seemed obedient, but most were very particular about how they were treated. Frustrated, Breed smacked his hands on the documents on the table and continued. He pointed out that the dragon shelter always needed repairs. The dragon's health had to be monitored, and they needed to be fed and given medicine. He emphasized that feeding and cleaning several hundred dragons couldn't be done in a single day. He then declared that he was the last dragon trainer left to care for them. The fat man lost his patience and grabbed Breed by the collar. He coldly suggested slaughtering enough dragons to make their numbers more manageable. Breed tried to reason with him, reminding him that reducing the dragons of the dragon army wasn't a simple task since they were the symbol of Dragania. But the fat man didn't care. He shoved Breed aside and scoffed, questioning if Breed even understood how much it cost to maintain a dragon. Breed knew that dragons were more of a money drain than anything else. Because of their large size, they needed big shelters, and when they got sick, medical bills were expensive. Sometimes, even with treatment, some still died. When that happened, raising a new dragon also cost a lot. If anyone understood how costly dragons were, it was Breed, who took care of them every day. If losing his job meant saving the dragons, Breed was willing to do whatever he could, even as someone with little power. He pulled out a logbook filled with important information about caring for dragons. But the fat man smacked it out of his hands, complaining about the terrible smell. He said the book was useless, and reminded Breed that he was just a lowly dragon breeder with nothing worth teaching. Then he stomped on the logbook like it was trash. Breed watched as his logbook was stomped on. He had worked in this place for 20 years. Over the years he had been yelled at many times, but they always trusted him with his tasks. He had believed that was their way of showing appreciation. But now, he realized that everything he had done could have been done by anyone. It didn't have to be him. He stared at the fat man's foot and walked toward him. Clenching his fist, he grabbed the leg of the chair the man was sitting on. Without effort, he lifted the chair along with the man. Then he calmly asked for his logbook back, explaining that it was important to him. After taking it, he balanced the chair on one leg on the table with ease, leaving the man struggling to keep himself steady. Before walking away, Breed wished him good health. Later at the first dragon shelter, Breed was packing up his things when two men walked in, teasing him about getting fired. They mocked him for lacking skills and said that's why he was stuck with a job that made him stink. They claimed that if it had been them, they would have finished quickly and gone home to have fun. Breed then asked if they were fine taking over his work. The two men laughed it off, saying it would be easy for them. After all, if an old man like Breed could do it, then it would be no trouble at all. These were the people who always dumped their work on him, so Breed felt lucky that he wouldn't have to deal with them anymore. One of the men, who had wide eyes, claimed they could just kick the dragons to make them listen. To prove his point, a long-haired man kicked one of the dragons hard in the face. But the dragon stayed silent and the soldiers laughed at it. Breed couldn't tell them that dragons had tough scales and thick muscles, which made their kicks useless. Besides, the dragon they kicked was naturally calm, so a simple kick wasn't enough to make it angry. While the soldier kept kicking the dragon in the background, Breed's thoughts drifted to other jobs that didn't involve dragons. He wondered if he could work in a store, on a farm, in transportation, or even try cooking. The idea of doing something new made him feel excited. Suddenly, the soldier who had been kicking the dragon stopped and turned to Breed. His face was red with anger and his veins looked like they were about to pop. He demanded to know what Breed's problem was. Only then did Breed realize that he had been glaring at them without noticing. He tried to make an excuse, but before he could, the soldier started calling him trash and pulled out his sword, ready to kill him. Just then, all the dragons in the shelter suddenly woke up and glared at them while growling. The one that had been kicked earlier was ready to attack the soldier. The soldiers panicked. One of the dragons bit the long-haired soldier's arm and crushed his arm bracers. The two soldiers ran for their lives, shouting that Breed hadn't trained them properly. But Breed had trained them well. Breed thanked the dragon for helping him. The dragon let out a weak growl. Since Breed was leaving for good, he decided to say his goodbyes. He visited each stable and bid farewell to his dragon friends. Some looked sad while others seemed happy for him. After saying goodbye to all the dragons, there was still one more left. She was the last dragon he needed to see. Breed headed to a heavily fortified shelter, the oldest one, built when the Dragon Rider army was first formed. Inside the dark shelter, only one dragon remained. She was fully chained, unable to move. Breed called out to Barbarossa, the chained dragon. She breathed out in response. Barbarossa was the oldest dragon in Dragonia and the leader of all the dragons in the Empire. Though she was now retired, it was said that the heroic king, who built the Empire of Dragania, had once ridden this mighty dragon. Barbarossa glared at Breed for a moment before sitting up. Breed was surprised since she usually stayed lying down. Then she let out a weak, sad growl. Breed couldn't believe the old dragon had seen through him. He admitted that he had come to say goodbye. Barbarossa's eyes widened in surprise, and Breed was just as shocked by her reaction. He explained that he was losing his job because of cost-cutting. After working so hard to take care of all the dragons, this was how they repaid him. Barbarossa growled in disapproval. Breed then asked her to look after the other dragons since she was the smartest. But Barbarossa shook her head and let out another disapproving growl. When he asked if she was worried about him, she only gave him a silent glare. Breed remembered how his co-workers looked down on him, how he was unpopular with girls, and how no one recognized his efforts. He had always believed his hard work would go unnoticed forever. But knowing that a dragon he cared for was worried about him made all his struggles feel worth it. He felt like crying. If he stayed any longer, he knew he wouldn't be able to hold back his tears. So he waved goodbye to Barbarossa and told her he would pray for her good health. Barbarossa silently stood up, her body trembling with anger. She let out a loud, powerful roar that echoed through the area, startling Breed. He turned around and saw the chains snapping apart. The dragons in the shelters growled in response, their voices filling the air. Barbarossa gently grabbed Breed's clothes with her teeth, like a mother carrying her young. Outside, night had already fallen. The soldiers from before were still complaining about Breed and the dragons. Furious, he swore to take revenge by beating up the dragons. Just then, the ground began to shake. The soldiers turned to see the fortified shelter breaking apart as a massive dragon emerged. Breed clung tightly to Barbarossa's neck, shouting for her to stop, but she ignored him. She let out another thunderous roar, and the other dragons roared back. One by one, they broke free from their shelters, smashing through the walls. Like a powerful wave, the dragons flooded the city with Barbarossa leading the charge. Breed watched in shock as more and more dragons appeared, realizing the situation was quickly spiraling out of control. Outside the city gates, a guard felt the ground tremble beneath him. When he turned to look, he was horrified to see the gates collapsing under the force of the dragons. The city was in ruins. Overwhelmed by exhaustion and stress, Breed could no longer process what was happening and fell unconscious. The next morning, Breed woke up to the bright sunlight and stretched his arms. He thought he had a good sleep. When he opened his eyes, he realized he had been resting against a dragon. As he looked around, he saw more dragons nearby. That was when he noticed he was in an unfamiliar place. He examined his hands and face, thinking about how he had traveled across the country before. He should have recognized the land, but he had no idea where he was. Based on the cold air, he guessed he was in the north. He remembered that dragons were weak to cold climates, and even the Empire struggled to attack that region. Despite this, the dragons had come all the way up north. Breed could only think of one reason. They must have believed he was running from the Empire. He was glad the dragons had escaped, but surviving in the north would be difficult for them. Dragons needed to eat a lot, consuming several kilograms of grass and drinking large amounts of water every day. In this cold region, the grass grew short. With hundreds of dragons living there, they quickly ate up all the grass. The area they had just passed through was already barren. But these dragons had followed him, so Breed swore not to let them starve. He had to find a solution. As he looked around, he noticed something. He told a few dragons to move to the left. That was when he saw a small cave nearby. He guessed it was the nest of a grand python, a giant poisonous snake that could swallow a baby dragon whole. Even a strong dragon had to fight with all its strength to defeat it. It was best not to provoke the creature, especially since Breed only had a small amount of healing supplies. Right now, his main concern was finding a place to rest. Breed suddenly noticed a dragon flying nearby, holding a grand python in its claws. At first he thought it was hunting, but something felt strange. Then the dragon released the grand python, leaving Breed confused. Before he could figure out why, the dragon turned toward him and flew in his direction. The dragon landed with a heavy impact, knocking Breed off balance. That was when he realized it wasn't a wild dragon. It had a rider. Seeing the armored figure on the dragon's back, Breed wondered if this was the bad feeling he had earlier. He had assumed the dragon was moving naturally, but now he understood the truth. The armored rider seemed surprised that Breed had dodged their attack. Without hesitation, they launched another attack, throwing a spear at him. Breed dodged again and quickly asked why he was being attacked. The rider then demanded to know if he was part of Dragonia's Dragon Corps, claiming that no one had been given permission to enter their territory. At that moment, Breed realized his mistake. He had crossed into another country's land, which was dangerous, especially now. Dragonia had recently warned other nations of an invasion. Worse, he wasn't alone, he had brought hundreds of dragons with him. Breed explained that it was a misunderstanding and asked the armored person to listen. However, the dragon rider didn't want to argue anymore and flew up, preparing for another attack. Breed saw that the opponent was strong enough to defeat a grand python. He couldn't afford to die over a misunderstanding. He quickly called for Barbarossa, and the dragon emerged from the forest with a loud roar. The two dragons clashed, and Barbarossa managed to block the attack, leaving the dragon rider confused. Breed knew that a flying dragon's charge was powerful, but its attack patterns were limited. He then signaled Barbarossa to attack from the right. Barbarossa noticed something from Breed's gesture. The dragon rider called him a fool for saying his plan out loud. They immediately ordered their dragon to be on guard from the right. However, Barbarossa suddenly attacked from the left, striking the flying dragon hard. At first, the dragon rider thought Barbarossa had ignored Breed's command, but then they realized the dragon hadn't followed his words. It had followed his hand signals instead. Breed praised Barbarossa for executing their plan perfectly. A trick like this was only possible because of their bond. The dragon rider smirked before falling from their dragon. They knew they had lost. Breed caught the dragon rider in his arms just in time. He felt relieved that she wasn't hurt, or it would have caused another misunderstanding. Then, he noticed the flying dragon had bite marks from the grand python. Its left leg had already changed color. The poison needed to be removed immediately. His eyes landed on the dragon rider's spear. He picked it up and said he would borrow it for a moment. Without hesitation, he cut off the discolored part and removed the poisoned flesh. The flying dragon roared in pain and struck Breed with its tail, sending him flying. Blood dripped from his head, but he stayed calm and reassured the dragon that it would recover soon. Strangely, the dragon suddenly calmed down, while the dragon rider silently watched from behind. She soon realized her dragon had been poisoned. Breed confirmed its condition was serious. He explained that dragons were strong, but if they became too overconfident, nature had many ways to bring them down. With the treatment done, he handed the spear back to the dragon rider. But as he did, he froze. Just moments ago, she had been trying to kill him. The dragon rider laughed and took off her helmet. She told Breed not to worry because she had lost the fight and failed her mission. Breed was shocked to see such a beautiful woman beneath the heavy armor. Fiona then pointed out how he had used an earth dragon to defeat a flying dragon and even healed its wound, one she hadn't even noticed. More than that, she assumed he was strong because he returned her spear without hesitation, even after she had attacked him. She apologized for her rudeness, explaining that as a princess from the countryside, she didn't know much about the world. Breed started to explain his situation but stopped when he realized the woman in front of him was a princess. Seeing his reaction, she apologized for not introducing herself earlier and told him her name, Fiona Shin Levitan, the first princess of the northern country of Levitan. Breed was shocked when he heard that. A princess hunting a dangerous grand python alone was unbelievable. What surprised him even more was that she had no escorts with her. She explained that a princess who had already lost had no reason to resist anymore. She didn't want any more bloodshed and asked Breed to take her to Dragonia. However, she also begged him to help save her people. Breed realized that Fiona had misunderstood the situation. In desperation, she offered to do anything in exchange for her people's safety. She even said she wouldn't mind becoming his mistress. Breed was stunned to hear such words from a princess. She called it a blessing in disguise that she was still unmarried. Although she was close to his age, she assured him she was strong and capable. Then she removed her armor, revealing her figure. Rather than face death, she believed there was still room for negotiation. But before she could say more, Breed grabbed her shoulders in anger and told her to calm down. The area fell silent. He then asked her to listen to his story first. Fiona found out that Breed used to be a dragon trainer from Dragonia but had been banished. When he was about to leave, the dragons chose to follow him on their own. She wondered if Dragonia was ruled by fools, since they had exiled someone so skilled. Realizing her mistake, she formally apologized to Breed. However, he asked her to stop, saying he couldn't have a princess bowing to him. Fianna stared at him for a moment before giving him a strange look. Then she asked for his name. After Breed told her his name, Fianna told him not to belittle himself. He admitted that not many people had the same skills as him. She realized she might have been wrong about the hero king of Dragonia, who was considered a legend. Breed simply said that things had turned out this way. He claimed he was nothing more than a regular dragon trainer, just a caretaker. Fianna gave him a doubtful look, then smiled. She stated that Levitan was a weak country that could collapse at any time. She had been trying to find a way to save her homeland. However, training to ride flying dragons took a long time, and monster hunting had its limits. No matter how much she thought about it, they lacked both time and manpower. She then remarked that this might be fate and asked if Breed would be willing to help. She formally invited him to her country, along with the dragons that followed him. Breed asked if she was hiring him. Fianna confirmed it and added that with the dragons, her country's power would grow. Since Breed had already been banished from his homeland, she assured him that it wouldn't be a bad offer. Breed thought it was a great offer, but there was a problem: housing and feeding the dragons as well as himself. He hesitated to respond, making Fianna wonder if he was refusing. He explained that he wanted to accept her offer but had 100 dragons following him. Fianna assured him that she could provide food and shelter. However, Breed added another concern: the dragons smelled terrible. Fianna was confused, so Breed warned her not to underestimate the effort needed to care for so many dragons. He explained that while they were fine outdoors, keeping them inside would cause their waste to contaminate the ground and create an unbearable stench. He doubted that Levitan had the right facilities for so many dragons, and worried that the entire country would end up smelling because of them. In response, Fianna casually leaned against Breed and took a sniff. He was confused as she smelled him from different angles. She admitted that his scent was strong enough to make her dizzy and wondered if he even bathed properly. However, she didn't entirely dislike his smell. Embarrassed, she blushed but insisted that a scent like his was nothing for a princess like her. Determined, she promised to provide the necessary facilities. Her country was weak, and to ensure its survival, she needed the dragons, and Breed, the only person who could control them. Finally, she made her intentions clear. She wanted Breed himself and asked for his hand. Breed froze. He felt like he should be grateful to Fianna for hiring him. He remembered how people used to mock him for his dirty job, bad smell, and unpleasant workplace. All his life, he had been called a nuisance and was never treated as someone important. He believed his life would always stay that way. But this was the first time someone had told him he was needed. For 20 years, he had felt like his life had no meaning. Now, for the first time, he wanted to be useful to Fianna. Overcome with emotions, he cried. One by one, the dragons appeared, watching him in silence as they waited for his decision. Barbarossa stepped forward and gave him a light tap on the back. Fianna then promised to grant him anything he asked and wanted to know if he had any concerns. Breed no longer hesitated. He knelt before Fianna, took her hand, and swore his loyalty. The dragon seemed pleased, and Barbarossa let out a quiet roar. Fianna rode the flying dragon back to her country, bringing Breed with her. When they arrived, she announced their return. Breed's eyes widened as he saw Levitan for the first time. He silently stared at the castle, and Fianna could tell he thought it looked small. She told him not to be polite and encouraged him to look around. The castle walls had long since collapsed, and they had to build a makeshift bridge. Most of the houses were falling apart. Almost all the men had died in the war, leaving only the elderly, women, and children. Breed asked if a war had happened recently. Fianna confirmed that Dragonia had invaded when she was a child. She had survived a long and brutal battle, but her siblings had lost their lives on the battlefield. The country had fallen into chaos, but at least some of them had managed to survive. Now, Fianna had only one duty: to protect and rule over her beloved country. Breed remained silent. Fianna then asked if it was alright to leave the dragons behind. Breed assured her that he had told them he would catch up later. Fianna understood. She explained that she could summon the dragons by whistling, but controlling them from a distance was impossible. Now that they had over 100 dragons, she couldn't help but admire Breed's skill in taming them. They were about to land inside the castle walls when the citizens noticed Fianna. Excited, they rushed to greet her and happily welcomed her back. Fianna thanked them and mentioned that she had brought souvenirs. Breed quickly realized that Fianna was an important figure. The citizens then turned their attention to him, curious about the man she had brought along. Breed introduced himself right away. Fianna told them that she had personally scouted him and called him an incredible dragon master. Hearing this made Breed uneasy, since the title felt too grand for him. Before the citizens could question further, Fianna warned them that a large number of dragons would be arriving soon, and things would become chaotic. However, the citizens gave Breed doubtful looks, which made him nervous. Sensing his discomfort, Fiona stepped in and reassured them that he would be a great help. She then told them to return to their work, as she still needed to take Breed to the dragon's stables. The citizens watched as Fiona dragged Breed away. Breed commented that he hadn't been welcomed at all. Fiona explained that their country was a remote place, cut off from the rest of the world. It was natural for the people to be cautious of him since he was an outsider. She told him not to worry because they would soon recognize his skills. Breed agreed with her. Unless he proved himself, the people wouldn't accept him. Words alone wouldn't change their minds. At that moment, he realized how naive he had been. Fiona found it hard to believe that someone with his skills lacked confidence. She warned that if he kept hesitating, the people would not take him seriously. Her words stung, but he couldn't deny the truth in them. Then she suddenly told him to start practicing by speaking to her like a friend. Breed was caught off guard and hesitated, saying he couldn't do that. Fiona insisted he shouldn't hold back, admitting that she had a short temper. Her gaze pulled him in once again. After a moment of hesitation, he finally gave in and dropped the honorifics when speaking to her. Fiona was pleased, but Breed still wasn't comfortable being completely casual with her. She decided to let it be for now, but warned him that before long he would find himself speaking to her informally without even realizing it. Her words left him speechless. Meanwhile, someone had been watching them from a nearby tree. Breed sensed the presence and turned around, but whoever it was had already disappeared. Fiona and Breed arrived at the dragon's stable, where Fiona called out for someone named Minnie. However, no one answered. This was unusual because Minnie was always in the stables. Breed wondered if she was the dragon master who worked there. Fiona confirmed it and mentioned that Minnie was an impressive girl, though she acted like a clingy puppy, which Fiona found cute. Despite what many believed, there were actually many female dragon riders. Dragons tended to like girls more than boys, so it was common to see women in the Dragon Night Guard. But Minnie was nowhere in sight. Fiona decided to wait for her to return. Breed guessed that she was just busy and told Fiona not to worry, saying he would introduce himself when she arrived. Fiona was surprised but chose to trust Breed with the situation. He reminded himself that Fiona had asked for his help, which was why he had come. Words alone wouldn't be enough. His main goal was to earn the people's approval through his actions. Fiona suddenly remembered something she wanted to tell Breed. She leaned in close and whispered that she liked men who were good at their work. Breed immediately felt flustered, and before he could respond, Fiona wished him luck with his job. Her words left him speechless, his heart pounding. As Breed waited in the stable for Minnie, he looked around, wondering where she had gone. He hadn't mentioned it to Fiona, but his biggest weakness was talking to other people. He recalled how Fiona had described Minnie as a troublemaker and a rascal in the past, though she had calmed down over time. Still, Fiona was grateful to Minnie for helping her become a dragon rider with her skills. She had also shared that Minnie once beat her up out of jealousy because she was getting along with another girl. Remembering this, Breed couldn't help but feel a little worried. Just when Breed thought he might get along with Minnie, a woman suddenly appeared and trapped him between her legs, choking him. She complained about how unfair Fiona was. Despite already having her, Fiona still brought in a lowly outsider. From her words, Breed quickly figured out who she was. She then warned him that he didn't belong in their country. If he didn't want to get hurt, she advised him to leave. But Breed refused, saying he had been officially hired by Fiona as a dragon master. He grabbed her legs and threw her off. Then, trying to ease the tension, he asked her to get along with him. The woman quickly regained her balance and scoffed, saying she didn't care about him and told him to leave. She made it clear that the stable belonged to her alone. This proud and arrogant girl was Minnie. She had heard about a dragon master who could supposedly control over 100 dragons at once. She sighed and said that was impossible. She knew that a dragon master could only tame one dragon at a time. Yet people claimed that an old man like Breed could handle 100 at once. She called him a liar and accused him of deceiving her beloved older sister. Angry, she grabbed a rake. Breed tried to stop her and asked her to listen, but she threw the rake at him. It completely missed his head. She gave him one last warning and coldly told him to leave the country if he didn't want to die. Breed was thrown out of the stables and felt miserable about losing his job again. He had tried to help Minnie, but she always snapped at him and rejected his offers. His situation seemed hopeless, but the dragons were already heading toward the forest. Then, something clicked in his mind. Minnie worked alone in the stables, feeding the dragons. She had once said she didn't trust dragon masters. Suddenly, Breed slowly opened the door, startling Minnie so much that she screamed and jumped. She angrily called him a name, but Breed assured her he wouldn't enter the stable. Instead, he asked if he could use the area nearby and if she was okay with it. Minnie didn't care what Breed planned to do there since it wasn't her responsibility, so she told him to do whatever he wanted. Breed seemed pleased and said he would take care of his business without causing trouble. He also mentioned that his dragons were finally arriving. Hearing this, Minnie swung open the stable doors and called him ridiculous. She suspected he was just making things up, pretending he had ordered the dragons to meet him there. She told him to stop lying, pointing out that she couldn't even hear the ground shaking. If 100 dragons were really coming, there should be some kind of sign. Breed, however, claimed he had told the dragons to stay quiet. A noise came from a nearby barrel, and Minnie turned to see a huge dragon growling beside the stables. Her eyes widened as more dragons carefully emerged from the forest. She couldn't believe what she was witnessing and let out a scream. Breed felt relieved that they had arrived on time and followed his instructions without making unnecessary noise. Minnie finally realized that Breed hadn't been lying about taming 100 dragons. But what surprised her even more was how they moved so quietly. Normally, just one dragon's approach would shake the ground and send roars echoing through the village. Yet somehow, Breed had managed to control all of them without causing a disturbance. She found it hard to believe that someone like him had pulled this off. Frustrated, she clenched her fists and stomped over to Breed. Grabbing his shirt, she admitted to herself that his skills were real. Still, she assumed he had put the dragons through extreme training to make them this obedient. Nearby, a dragon let out a soft, weak growl. Minnie scoffed and declared that she didn't trust dragon masters at all. Breed couldn't understand why she was so distrustful. Minnie simply told him to wait, because she was determined to prove that he was a fraud. When Minnie was a kid, she loved reading stories about dragon masters in children's books. Unlike dragon knights who fought with dragons, dragon masters took care of them and treated them like friends. Minnie admired them and thought they were heroes, even though other kids called her weird. Watching dragons and their masters working together like close friends made her respect them even more. Now in the present, Minnie finally admitted that she had been wrong. After seeing how Breed could control all the dragons from a distance, she had to agree that he was a skilled dragon master. But she assumed that Breed had put the dragons through harsh training to make them follow his commands. She even suggested that Breed must have done something scary to them. Flustered, Breed quickly told her to wait, saying she was misunderstanding the situation. Just then, Breed noticed a thin, weak-looking dragon peeking out from the stables. It quickly hid, but Breed had already seen the scars all over its body. Minnie ran toward the dragon and called it Kusuke, which made Breed guess that was its name. Minnie apologized for scaring it and gently told it to come back to the stables with her. The dragon let out a weak growl as Minnie hugged it. Breed took another look at the dragon and noticed a large scar on its face. Minnie reminded Breed that she didn't trust him at all. She warned him that if he ever tried to touch her dragons, she would make him regret it. Breed was too shocked to say anything. He couldn't believe he had been scared by a girl younger than him. He called himself pathetic and wondered how he could explain this to Fiona. Just then, Fiona showed up and asked what he was saying about her. Breed was startled by her sudden appearance. She was dressed casually and greeted him, saying her work was done, so she came to check on him. But it was clear to her that things weren't going well between Breed and Minnie. The two sat down to talk. Fiona couldn't believe that someone skilled enough to tame 100 dragons would have trouble handling one girl. Breed agreed, admitting that Minnie was harder to deal with than dragons, but he didn't understand why Minnie seemed to dislike dragon masters so much. Fiona then asked if he had met Kusuke. Breed remembered the scarred dragon and asked what was so important about it. Fiona explained that Kusuke was the first dragon Minnie helped hatch. She even named it, and it was her favorite. But because it was her first time raising a dragon, Minnie pushed herself too hard and ended up getting sick for 3 days. A dragon master from town was asked to care for Kusuke while she recovered. However, when Minnie got better, she found something terrible when she returned to the stables. Kusuke was hanging in the stables, wounded, chained, and tortured. The Dragon Master claimed that Kusuke wouldn't stop growling, so he punished it by whipping it. He told Minnie not to worry, saying he had only whipped it too hard, which somehow caused it to pass out. He then changed the subject, asking Minnie for a date as repayment for taking care of her dragons. He even suggested that she could return the favor with her body. Minnie knocked him out with a punch, sending him flying. She then ran to Kusuke and removed its chains. She regretted leaving Kusuke with someone else, knowing things would end up this way. Kusuke weakly licked her face, and Minnie called it an idiot for worrying about her instead of itself. Kusuke had been shackled all over its body and locked in a cramped stable. It had also been deprived of food and whipped for misbehaving, which left the dragon weakened and fearful over time. Fiona shared how Minnie finally realized that the dragon masters she once idolized were nothing like the ones in children's stories. From that day on, Minnie stopped trusting dragon masters completely. Fiona asked for understanding and forgiveness for Minnie's behavior toward her. Breed let out a loud sigh and said he was relieved. He explained that it wasn't about Minnie's background. He had just thought Minnie hated him because he smelled bad. Fiona couldn't help but laugh, saying that was the last thing she expected to hear from him. Breed told her not to blame him since he was never popular with girls anyway. Fiona apologized for laughing but wondered if Breed would be able to handle things afterward. She mentioned that Minnie's distrust of dragon masters was quite serious and offered to help. However, Breed insisted it wasn't a problem. He said asking for Fiona's help was unnecessary. He reminded her that he was someone he respected and trusted deeply. With confidence, he declared that since even the princess believed in him, handling Minnie would be easy. He then gathered his dragons, determined to show Minnie what being a true dragon master was all about. A few days later, Minnie woke up while working in the stables. She couldn't believe she had fallen asleep while working. When she realized Kusuke was no longer by her side, she noticed the dragon peeking through the gap in the door. Curious, Minnie walked over to see what the dragon was watching. Outside, she saw a dirty breed giving instructions to the dragons as they built a house. The dragons moved in an organized and coordinated manner, following Breed's directions perfectly. Minnie was stunned to see how much the forest had changed in just a few days. The once barren area had turned into something impressive. She could understand how 100 dragons could accomplish this, but managing that many dragons and keeping them in line would normally take a large group of people. Yet Breed was doing it all alone, as if the dragons were an extension of his own body. She couldn't help but narrow her eyes in doubt, but as she watched Breed work with a smile on his face, she noticed that the dragons showed no signs of resistance. They didn't seem to dislike him at all. In fact, they appeared to fully trust him. Kusuke suddenly disappeared from Minnie's side and approached Breed's dragons. She tried to call Kusuke back, but Breed stopped her. Minnie panicked, saying that Kusuke had been afraid of others since that incident. Not just humans, but other dragons too. She insisted that Kusuke was helpless without her, and if the other dragons attacked or injured him, she wouldn't be able to help. Breed calmly told her to watch. Minnie stayed quiet and turned her attention back to Kusuke. To her surprise, nothing violent happened. Kusuke was simply mingling with the other dragons. Breed explained that dragons raised by humans often avoided other dragons and became cautious around them. However, he believed they needed chances to interact with their own kind. Otherwise, they would lose the opportunity to grow and mature. Minnie realized that she had been seeing the signs all along. She knew that Kusuke would often watch the other dragons from a distance or act cautiously around them. Deep down, she had always felt that something was wrong. It finally hit her that she had been keeping Kusuke away from the others. She understood that it was her fault. Breed then remarked how amazing Kusuke was. He explained that once a dragon lost trust in people, it would usually avoid them forever. But he could see that Kusuke was trying, in its own awkward way, to break out of its shell and face him directly. He couldn't help but smile. He pointed out that Kusuke had become such an honest dragon because Minnie had faced the situation head-on. Minnie lowered her head and silently cried. Breed noticed but then declared that it was time to finish everything. The dragons gathered around him in a friendly manner. Watching how close Breed was with the dragons, Minnie recalled the pictures from children's books about dragon masters. She realized she was no match for Breed, who had truly earned the dragon's trust. The next morning, the new dragon stables were finally completed. Breed thanked the dragons for their help and they growled in response. He told them he would handle the rest and asked them to get some rest. He was confident that the new stable could house 100 dragons, but he still needed to make some tools himself. As he started hammering nails, his mind drifted to Minnie. He wondered where she had gone and if she was upset with him for involving Kusuke. Lost in thought, he accidentally hammered his own hand. Just then, Minnie appeared and called him lame. Breed asked where she had been, and Minnie said she had just gone to gather some supplies for him. She told him not to bother making the tools himself and to ask her if he needed anything. Then, blushing slightly, she told him he could stop by her stables any time. Breed asked if that meant she was approving of him. Minnie blushed and said she was only helping because he seemed a bit useful. She added that her help was also for Fiona's sake. Breed took her hands and thanked her for the tools. Minnie pulled back and angrily asked why he was suddenly holding her hands. Breed quickly apologized, realizing his gloves were dirty and his hands were covered in sweat from working earlier. He assumed Minnie would hate being touched by such dirty hands. Minnie glanced at his dirty hands, sighed, and called him a dummy, saying he was completely wrong. Then she giggled, turned around, and called him a weirdo. It was the first time Breed had seen her smile. It seemed like Minnie had finally found the Dragon Master she had always admired in those books. Back in the Empire of Dragonia, Sarah Valiadan, the captain of the Dragon Knights force, reported to the Emperor that only a few dragons remained in their stables. She explained that her patrol units had already been sent out to search for the escaped dragons. The Emperor, Bompard, sat surrounded by young girls and asked what they should do next. Sarah mentioned they were considering buying new dragons, and that she had already chosen some agents in the commercial city of Zeta to handle the task. Bompard sighed and said he was disappointed in her. He questioned if this was the best solution she could come up with. He reminded her that he had given her the position of Knight General because of her exceptional skills, holding back from taking her in as his mistress. As he had expected, women were useless. Sarah had once been a general in a country that Dragonia had conquered. After her people were taken hostage, she had no choice but to swear loyalty to Bompard. Bompard then said he no longer needed dragons, which left Sarah confused. He claimed that training beasts would be more practical. Dragons required too much money and effort to maintain. Food, water, and medical care strained the Empire's resources. In contrast, beasts were easier to capture and wouldn't run away or die as easily. He proudly called it the most brilliant idea he had ever come up with. Sarah left the throne room feeling frustrated. There was no way beasts would follow human commands. Even trained dragons took time to trust humans. Still, Bompard had ordered her to make it work, and as his subordinate, she couldn't refuse. Sarah thought about a certain man who once lived in the Empire. He had a unique talent for handling dragons, moving them as if they were extensions of his own body. His deep understanding of dragons allowed him to diagnose their injuries or illnesses instantly. He was powerful enough to destroy the entire castle if he wanted to, but he was long gone. Sarah couldn't believe Breed had left without even saying goodbye. She wondered where he was now. Meanwhile, Breed had been working on his new dragon stables when Minnie showed up, offering to show him around town. Breed stared at her for a moment before asking who she was. Minnie got annoyed and said he should recognize her. Breed then commented that she looked different than usual. Minnie explained that she dressed that way on her days off. Breed admitted that it suited her well. In truth, it was the first time Minnie had dressed up like that. Breed asked why she was there. Minnie pointed out that he had been working non-stop in the stables and needed a break. Breed seemed confused by the idea of taking a day off. Minnie realized that he had gone through difficult times in the past. She explained that Fiona had asked her to give him a break from work. Without giving him a chance to argue, she dragged him away to clean up before they left. Soon after, they rode a flying dragon to the castle town of Levitan. On the way, Breed shared that back in Dragonia, he used to work from morning until evening. Now that he could return to his lodgings regularly, he didn't think he needed a day off. Minnie told him to stop overthinking since they were already in town. The town was bustling with activity, mostly with women and the elderly. Minnie explained that most people lived there, which made it lively. Breed looked around, wide-eyed. Minnie reminded him that he was a grown man and should stop gawking like an idiot. As his superior, she warned him not to embarrass her. Breed apologized, admitting that he had never experienced an outing like this before. Minnie then spotted a food stall and handed Breed a meat skewer. He hesitated, worried he might cause trouble. After taking a bite, he complained about how hot it was, but Minnie told him to keep eating. Breed took another bite and was surprised at how delicious it tasted. Minnie revealed that it was thorny lizard meat. Breed remarked that the tender, flavorful meat melted in his mouth. Thorny lizards were smaller versions of dragons, known for their aggressive and dangerous nature. Breed realized that hunting these creatures likely provided a steady income for the town. He thanked Minnie for the treat and said he would never quit such a rewarding job. Minnie smirked and told him she had something even tastier to show him. The way she held that meat stick somehow. Minnie and Breed soon headed to the marketplace, where many people sold processed, raw, and cooked food. Minnie asked Breed what he thought about their town's pride, the marketplace. Breed noticed that the place was much livelier compared to the rest of the town. Minnie explained that hunted beasts were brought there, cut into smaller pieces, and then sold to vendors. Since there had been a recent big catch, the marketplace was more crowded than usual. When Breed asked about the big catch, Minnie said it was thanks to Fiona. They had managed to bring down a grand python, and she was sure that its skin and bones were already being sold. Breed wasn't surprised, knowing what Fiona was capable of. Now that Minnie had mentioned it, Breed also noticed some merchants from other countries among the town's vendors. Minnie pointed out an old man with impressive skills and showed Breed a pair of gloves that could be considered a work of art. Breed could tell that the creator was skilled as he examined the gloves while holding Minnie's hand. Minnie, blushing, reminded him that she only gave him permission to look, not to hold. Suddenly, the crowd gathered around the grand python. It was larger than any Breed had seen before. Minnie could tell that everyone was struggling to process it because most of them were elderly with limited strength. Breed decided to step in and help. The old men recognized him and were relieved to have a younger person assist them since their backs were already strained. They instructed Breed to pull off the python's skin. Breed took a deep breath and using his strength ripped the skin off with ease. Everyone watching was impressed, knowing that even 5 people wouldn't have been able to do it. After the processing, everyone applauded and thanked Breed for his help. Minnie also praised him. Breed felt relieved that he hadn't torn the skin. Minnie looked confused, so Breed explained that one wrong move could have damaged the skin, which would have lowered the product's value. Minnie told him not to be silly since no human could tear a grand python's skin. However, she paused when she realized how close Breed had been to actually ruining it. She wondered how much strength he really had. Taking care of dragons for so long might have made him stronger, but there should have been a limit to human strength. She started to think that Breed's strength might already be on par with dragons, though that seemed hard to believe. The elderly villagers gathered around Breed and thanked him for his help, saying it was too hard for them to handle on their own. Breed was happy to assist. However, they felt bad seeing him covered in dirt, which ruined his usual clean appearance. Breed joked that he could say the same about them. The elderly said it was normal for them and that they didn't want to waste water since the country lacked a proper water source. They wished they had a river so Breed could wash himself. Breed then remembered that the country didn't have a large river and mainly relied on wells for water. To make things worse, most of the townspeople were elderly or children, making it difficult for them to fetch water. He thought that if a river were available, the town would develop quickly, and Fiona would be thrilled. He imagined Fiona wearing a swimsuit and pulling him into the river for a swim. He pictured her smooth skin and lively figure, then imagined her slipping on a rock and falling into the water. As she sat there soaked, she would ask him how he planned to make up for getting her wet. Breed punched himself to snap out of his daydream. Minnie asked what was going on, but Breed brushed it off, saying it was nothing. Minnie agreed that having a river would be helpful since she also wanted to cool off. Still caught up in his thoughts, Breed casually mentioned that he could probably draw water from somewhere. Minnie looked at him curiously, and Breed wondered if he had said that out loud. Everyone immediately got excited after hearing what Breed had said. Minnie eagerly asked if he could really draw water to create a river. The elderly were impressed, saying it was expected from the man Fiona had put her trust in. The kids excitedly asked if they would finally have a river. The elderly agreed, saying Breed would make one for them. However, they were curious how it would be possible since there were no rivers nearby. Someone reminded them not to doubt Breed, since he was the man their princess had brought along, so he surely had a plan. In reality, Breed had only blurted it out while lost in his imagination, but now that everyone believed him, the kids thanked him for making their dream come true. Breed had no choice but to figure out a way to make it happen. Soon after the river was completed, Breed relaxed under the sun. Fiona and Minnie then showed up wearing swimsuits. Fiona invited Breed to join them since the water felt refreshing. Minnie added that the one who contributed the most to the river shouldn't hold back. Breed eventually joined them. Afterward, Fiona said she had fun. Breed then asked if Minnie had left. Fiona replied that they were alone and gently touched Breed's rough hands. His heart pounded as Fiona gazed into his eyes. She leaned forward, about to kiss him. However, it was all just a dream. Instead of a kiss, Breed woke up to a dragon biting him, hungry for food. Later in the stables, Minnie was shocked by what she had heard. She couldn't believe Breed had been joking when she thought he had come up with a brilliant idea to create the river. Breed sincerely apologized with a deep bow and admitted he had been daydreaming the whole time. Minnie also apologized for getting caught up in the excitement. She wondered what Breed had been thinking about, but Breed couldn't tell her about the swimsuits and brushed it off as nothing important. Minnie then mentioned that the rumors might have already reached Fiona. Breed grew nervous. If things got worse, everyone might shun him as a liar and a fraud. He could lose the job he had worked so hard for and his dragons might be slaughtered. He realized he had no choice but to find a real water source in the end. Later in the forest, Minnie called Breed a wimp for worrying about rumors. Breed said he wouldn't care if it was just about him, but he'd hate for Minnie or Fiona to get involved. Minnie blushed and insisted that it wouldn't bother her. As they climbed a cliff, Breed told her there was no need to follow him. Minnie reminded him that she was still his superior and that the forest was dangerous. She asked how Breed planned to find a water source. Breed said he would ask for someone's help. When he reached the top of the cliff, he found a well and called out to Undine, a navy-colored water dragon. Undine belonged to a species that preferred living in watery environments, where they could sneak up on prey more easily. Although its small body made it slower, it was still quick enough to keep up with most marches. Female soldiers often praised water dragons for being cute and easy to ride. When Minnie saw Undine, Breed explained that water dragons could sense water sources. Undine, in particular, could smell clear water from a kilometer away. Minnie was surprised that Undine could detect water from such a distance, especially in a forest filled with different scents. Breed explained that Undine only reacted to clear water, which he liked. If they followed him, they could find a reliable water source. The forest was too large for them to search easily. Minnie agreed, explaining that the forest stretched for several kilometers in every direction, so finding a water source would take some luck. Breed didn't want to waste too much time since people might start thinking he was a fraud. Just then, Breed noticed someone nearby and asked what he was doing. Minnie explained that the hunter was practicing spear throwing because it was dangerous to get too close to a beast. Breed understood that the spear had a rope attached, so once it was lodged in the beast, hunters could pull it back to stop the beast from escaping. This gave Breed an idea. He asked the hunter if he could borrow the spear for a moment. Breed attached a stronger and longer rope to the spear. When Minnie asked what he was planning, Breed said he had a way to track down the smell of water without wandering through the forest. He gripped the spear tightly and threw it with all his strength, sending it far into the distance. Once it struck the ground, Breed pulled it back in one motion and handed the tip to Undine to sniff. Undine shook his head, so Breed tried again in another direction. Minnie realized that Breed was trying to make Undine pick up the scent of water from deep underground, helping them expand their search range. Breed confirmed that this was the fastest way to find water, but it was only possible because of Undine's sharp sense of smell. Minnie thought it was also thanks to Breed's incredible strength. On the second try, Undine sniffed the spear's tip and roared. That's when Breed knew they had hit the jackpot. The two made their way through the forest, with Undine leading the way. As they got closer, Undine's reactions became even stronger. Minnie noticed that no beasts were approaching them, which felt strange. Breed then explained that no beast would come after them because he had Undine drop his feces along the way. The strong smell scared off smaller beasts. He even showed his pocket stuffed with dragon feces. Minnie called him weird and told him not to show her something so strange. Breed explained further that the smell of dragon feces was so strong that even flies wouldn't come near it. It could also be used as a landmark to help them find their way back if they got lost. Minnie was surprised that dragon feces could be useful like that. Breed admitted he was kind of forced to learn about it. He remembered how he served in the Dragonia Empire's military, where he was often left behind, and a lot of things happened during that time. Suddenly, Undine roared and jumped with excitement. Breed claimed they had finally reached the water source. They emerged from the thick forest and found a pond. However, the pond was too small to create a river leading to the castle town. Minnie said it was a shame but figured there was nothing they could do about it. Since they had worked hard, she suggested taking a dip before heading back. Breed, however, stayed focused on Undine's reaction. He suspected that the pond couldn't possibly be this small, not with how strongly Undine had reacted. Minnie noticed a large boulder with water gushing out from it. Breed guessed that it was the source of the nearby puddle. Minnie wondered if they should try moving the rock. Breed said it was worth a try and pushed the boulder. Minnie was surprised to see it shift. Breed insisted it was impossible for him to move it, but Minnie was certain it had budged and pointed out the marks where it had shifted. However, part of the boulder was stuck in the nearby cliff, and even Undine couldn't push it free. Besides, Undine was already distracted by the nearby grass and seemed to be having the time of his life. Breed dipped into the water to cool off his head since all the thinking had given him a headache. He noticed how clear the water was. Water from the mountains was usually murky, but since Undine had found it, it was crystal clear. Then he spotted some white branches among the rocks and leaves at the bottom. It also seemed like something moved, but it couldn't have been a fish since it was spring water. Suddenly, bubbles started rising from the bottom of the pond. Breed pulled his head out of the water as a chunk of rock floated up from below, confusing him. Minnie noticed it and shouted a warning. It wasn't a rock, it was a massive beast. The beast slammed its body into the water, causing it to explode inward and pull Breed deeper into the pond. Minnie called out for him, but Breed was already underwater. The monster approached Breed and tried to eat him. Breed managed to keep the beast's jaws from closing, but one wrong move could have torn him apart. He recognized the creature as a mill crocodile, a beast usually found in ponds or rivers. These creatures had strong facial muscles and powerful bites capable of crushing shells and bones with ease. Anyone caught in their jaws would be crushed to a pulp, much like being ground by a millstone, hence the name mill crocodile. Breed realized that the white branches around him were actually bits of crushed bone, likely from animals the creature had ambushed while they were drinking from the pond. However, this mill crocodile was much larger than normal, nearly twice the size of Undine. He figured that Minnie was probably trying to order Undine to help, but he knew his dragon was lost in its own world. For now, Breed had to rely on himself since he couldn't hold on much longer. He struggled to push the jaws apart, but the creature's teeth had already pierced his back. At this rate, he wouldn't last another minute. Then he remembered something similar from his childhood. A dragon had once bitten his glove, and when nothing else worked to make it let go, he sneezed. The dragon had been startled and loosened its grip. Breed realized that no matter how strong an opponent was, if they lost focus while applying force, there was a chance to fight back. Breed braced himself and removed one hand from the beast's upper jaw. He reached into his pocket, pulled out some dragon feces, and threw it into the beast's throat. The creature swallowed it and immediately started thrashing and roaring in pain. Mill crocodiles had poor eyesight and relied heavily on their sense of smell. The awful stench of dragon feces overwhelmed it, giving Breed the chance to escape. He let go of the beast's jaws and kicked it away. Though relieved to have escaped, he quickly realized he was running out of air and still far from the surface. Refusing to give up, Breed dove deeper and grabbed a rock from the ocean floor. When he pulled it loose, bubbles started rising from underneath it. The force of the bubbles pushed him upward. The beast, however, was still close behind. Breed threw the rock into the beast's mouth, then used it as a foothold to propel himself upward with the rising bubbles. Riding the current, he surged toward the surface. Breed finally reached the surface and saw Minnie trying to move Undine. She ran toward him, asking if he was okay. Breed said he was fine. Minnie praised him for surviving the mill crocodile's attack. She mentioned that Undine wouldn't budge from his spot. Breed realized that Undine was too distracted by the grass. Undine finally noticed Breed and looked shocked at how battered he was. Breed complained about how long it took Undine to notice he had just gotten out of the water. Minnie tried to help Breed, but the mill crocodile suddenly reappeared, ready to swallow them whole. They couldn't react in time as the beast cleared the rock from its mouth and opened wide again. Breed was too exhausted to move, but just before the attack, the beast suddenly froze and began trembling in fear. Undine stepped in front of it, smirking, and gave the creature a menacing glare. The mill crocodile backed off and returned to the water, becoming calm. This was the power of dragons, descendants of the ancient rulers who once controlled the entire continent. That deep-rooted pride and fear remained even through the ages. No matter how large a beast was, it couldn't resist the instinctive fear instilled since ancient times. The mill crocodile shuddered as Undine approached and calmly patted its head like a pet. Minnie was impressed by how Undine managed to overpower a beast much larger than him with sheer determination. Breed explained that water dragons had been able to subdue mill crocodiles since ancient times, and would often hunt them down. He believed that the fear instilled in the mill crocodiles from long ago hadn't worn off yet. He pointed out that the mill crocodile already seemed to have accepted Undine as its master. Taking advantage of this, Undine decided to rest on the large beast's floating body. Breed then realized they could use the beast's strength to their advantage. He tied a strong rope around a boulder and gave instructions to the mill crocodile through Undine. When Minnie asked what he was doing, Breed simply said he was having the mill crocodile help them. Since they had already seen how powerful the beast was, Breed figured they could use that strength to move the boulder. Minnie noticed how Breed gave instructions to Undine, who then passed them on to the mill crocodile. She was impressed by Breed's ability to come up with such clever ideas. Breed agreed that it was a pretty wild but smart plan. Minnie offered to help and grabbed the rope. The four of them pulled with all their strength. Breed encouraged them, saying they were doing well. With one final pull, they all gave it their best effort. The boulder was pushed aside and water gushed out from the ground. Seeing how much water was flowing, Breed said it would be enough to create a river. All they needed was the dragon's help to dig a ditch and direct the water toward the town. Suddenly, Minnie noticed that too much water was coming out. The nearby cliff where the boulder had been also cracked and burst open, causing more water to flood the area. Breed and Minnie realized they had messed up. More cracks formed and water overflowed, sweeping both of them away. Thankfully, Undine was nearby and caught them. Breed and Minnie climbed onto Undine's back and followed the flood, which had erupted from the pond. Breed grew worried that the flood might cause serious damage to the town. Just then, Fiona called out to Breed while riding her flying dragon. Breed was surprised to see her. Fiona asked if the flood was their doing. Breed and Minnie immediately bowed and apologized. Breed admitted he had gone overboard and caused the town to flood after getting her hopes up. Fiona tried to say that wasn't the problem, but Breed insisted his mistake was unforgivable and said he would take responsibility, even if it cost him his life. Minnie quickly stepped in, saying it was her fault and begging Fiona to spare Breed's life. Suddenly, Fiona burst out laughing. She said they were misunderstanding something and told them to. The group made their way through the forest to return to town. Fiona said the two would understand once they saw something. Breed's eyes widened when he saw a river under the bridge with people gathered around it. Even Minnie was surprised. They couldn't believe the town was safe and that a river had been created. Breed remembered seeing planes in that area before and thought the town should have been flooded. Minnie then pointed to some old men using scoops to work on something. The old men explained that they had worked together after Breed and Minnie left and were relieved they had finished in time. The two were stunned, especially Breed. He was shocked that the townspeople had worked so hard on a plan with such low chances of success. He knew rumors had spread quickly, but he never thought they would go to such lengths without solid proof it would work. Fiona said she was the one in charge, and Breed assumed she had given the orders directly. Minnie then questioned whether Fiona had considered the possibility of Breed failing, which would have made all their hard work meaningless. Fiona confidently replied that she never doubted Breed because he was the one she had chosen to trust. Breed admitted he was glad she had that much faith in him, but he also wondered if she was overestimating him. Fiona insisted she had a good reason. She believed Breed was capable of achieving far greater accomplishments than this, and she was sure Breed knew that deep down. Breed said he was just a dragon master, but Fiona smiled warmly and told him she expected even greater things from him next time. Breed felt defeated and started wondering if he was a masochist for letting himself be led around so easily. When Minnie asked what was wrong, Breed said he didn't understand himself anymore. Fiona then remarked that this was the moment of their hero's triumphant return. In the northern forest of Dragonia, soldiers struggled to move a thorny lizard, hoping to tame it as a beast. Sarah wondered if this wild and aggressive behavior was just natural for beasts. The soldiers grumbled about how hard it was to tame a beast, especially compared to dragons, which were more obedient toward humans. Sarah realized it would likely be impossible to make beasts follow commands. Even with several people helping, they barely managed to keep the creature under control. She doubted anyone could ever ride it. Suddenly, a loud noise interrupted them. A rowdy man confidently appeared. handling a thorny lizard by himself and even riding it with ease. He pulled on the rope, choking the beast before tossing it into the air. The man then used the creature as a cushion to soften his landing. He asked Sarah what she thought of his display. This man was Marco don Dragonia, the fourth prince of Dragonia. Sarah admitted his feat was impressive. She had heard Marco joined the Knight's Order because he had little chance of inheriting the throne. Still, his strength clearly reflected his royal bloodline, though Sarah wasn't fond of him. Marco approached Sarah and casually touched her chin. He confidently said he was skilled at taming women and asked if Sarah wanted to find out for herself. Sarah slapped his hand away and called his words disgusting. Marco laughed and told her not to look so angry since he was just joking. At that moment, Sarah realized she didn't like Marco at all. Back in her hometown, men like him didn't exist. If only they hadn't lost to these thieves from Dragonia. Marco then announced that they would raid a nearby village since they were already in the area. He said everyone could keep any alcohol and women they found. The soldiers cheered, except for Sarah. However, some soldiers seemed uneasy since they were in another country's territory, and feared the locals might fight back. Marco laughed loudly and said only fools would dare challenge Dragonia. He claimed they could just kill anyone foolish enough to try. In Levitan, Breed sat surrounded by fruits and vegetables, wondering what they were for. Minnie explained that the farmers had given them to show their gratitude to Breed. The farmers confirmed this, explaining how they had struggled for a long time due to the lack of water. Now that Breed had created a river for them, their farming would improve. One farmer was especially relieved, saying they no longer needed to sell their family members and calling Breed a messenger from the gods. Breed replied that he had only done what felt natural. Minnie insisted that Breed deserved more than just thanks for his efforts. Breed felt a bit overwhelmed, surprised that his offhand suggestion had worked out so well. The farmers also mentioned they were planning a big party to thank him and hoped he would attend. Breed hesitated, saying he had work to do, but Minnie offered to take care of the dragon so he could go. The farmers begged him to attend no matter what. Feeling nervous about going alone, Breed asked Minnie for help. Minnie playfully told him he would manage just fine, and added that Fiona's reputation would improve if he showed off a little. Realizing that it might actually work, Breed decided to bring someone with him. Later at the party, the red dragon Aphrodite performed a circus-like act under Breed's guidance. The small quick dragon impressed everyone with her ball-rolling tricks and spins. The crowd cheered for Breed, calling him the best dragon master, and even praised Fiona for bringing him along. Aphrodite was known as a red dragon who carried the bloodline of Barbarossa. She moved as swiftly as a cat and was so skilled that she could handle almost anything. Breed felt grateful for bringing her to perform. The older guests praised Breed for the impressive show and encouraged him to eat and drink to his heart's content. Breed didn't hold back and quickly downed the alcohol. Aphrodite seemed happy to see him enjoying himself. However, despite trying to stay composed, Breed was already getting tipsy. Women suddenly gathered around Breed, scolding the old men for making him drink too much. They handed him water while admiring his strong muscles. The old men warned them to behave, but the girls ignored them and kept flirting with Breed. For the first time in his life, Breed enjoyed the attention from the ladies, but the moment didn't last long. Aphrodite appeared behind them, growling menacingly. The girls froze, quickly realizing how furious she was. Breed apologized, joking that Aphrodite was just jealous. Aphrodite pouted, a clear sign that the dragon wouldn't listen to him anymore. He offered her some food as a peace offering, but she swatted his hand away, still acting jealous. Breed, too drunk to think clearly, struggled to respond. Suddenly, Aphrodite grabbed him and stormed off, leaving the party behind. Breed apologized for leaving early. One of the girls then realized that Breed wasn't just popular with the ladies, he was popular with dragons too. Aphrodite ran around aimlessly while Breed kept asking her to calm down. He felt dizzy from all the shaking and ended up vomiting along the way. After a while, he realized the place looked familiar and gave Aphrodite directions on where to go. Even though Breed felt more nauseous, he knew they were close to their destination. Aphrodite suddenly stopped, her eyes widening at the sight before her. They had reached a beautiful flower field. Seeing it, Aphrodite finally calmed down, which made Breed feel relieved. He gathered some flowers and made a flower crown. Calling Aphrodite over, he gently placed it on her head. Aphrodite smiled, loving flowers so much that no matter how upset she was, a flower crown from Breed would always lift her mood. Breed had found the field while searching for a water source the other day, never expecting that remembering the way would help calm Aphrodite. Aphrodite then bit off a flower and tucked it behind Breed's ear. Breed smiled, happy that Aphrodite had finally settled down. Aphrodite suddenly became tense and started growling. She bit Breed's arm and dragged him away. Breed wondered if she was still upset with him. Just then, he heard loud footsteps coming from the forest. His eyes widened when he saw a familiar banner fluttering. Dragonia's soldiers riding thorny lizards poured out of the forest. Shocked, he couldn't understand why they were there. He tried to tell Aphrodite that they needed to escape, but the boulder they were hiding behind suddenly cracked and exploded. Breed was thrown back by the blast. As the dust settled, the soldiers spotted him and quickly recognized him as the Dragon Master who had recently been fired. They questioned why he was in the area. Marco stepped forward, surprised to see a familiar face. He remembered Breed's name and called him out. Aphrodite growled and stood protectively in front of Breed. Marco, sitting atop a large thorny lizard, sneered as he recalled that Breed was the slacker who always reeked of dragons. It looked like Breed recognized him. That is the end of the recap at Chapter 7. Please read the pinned comment about the next part.